So the next murmur that I want to talk about is mitral regurgitation. And remember, we're still on systolic murmurs. So mitral regurgitation is going to be best heard in the mitral area, or apex. This murmur is actually what we call a holosystolic or a pansystolic murmur. And all that means is that it lasts throughout the entirety of systole. So let's start at S1. In a normal heart, S1 is caused by the closing of the mitral valve. And that closing occurs because the pressure in the ventricle, this P here, is greater than the pressure in the atrium, this small p here. And so normally, this valve would close, and that would give you your S1. And in addition, you have your closed aortic valve here. But instead of closing, remember we're talking about mitral regurgitation. And so this is a closing problem. And so as the pressure starts to build in this left ventricle, but still with the aortic valve closed, blood is actually getting through this valve. And so that's going to cause a murmur right when S1 occurs. So right as that valve tries to close, it doesn't close fully, and because the pressure is higher in the left ventricle than the left atrium, you actually start that murmur right at S1. Now as soon as the heart begins to eject blood, this aortic valve opens right up and blood comes out this way. But because the pressure remains higher in this ventricle than the atrium the whole time, you actually get flow through this regurgitant valve throughout the entire cycle. And you would think naturally that as the heart contracts harder, that maybe this pressure would become bigger. And the truth is that the pressure actually does become bigger, but in chronic mitral regurgitation, which is what we're talking about, the atrium actually gets bigger or dilates. And so by doing this, it becomes more compliant. And what that means is that it can accept the blood that's coming back into it at a lower pressure. So it can accept more volume at a lower pressure. And as a result, that pressure in the atrium does not go up so much. But because the pressure difference between the left ventricle, which is really high, remember that's the workforce of the body, and the left atrium, which is pretty low because it's just receiving blood from the lungs, which is a low pressure system, the jets of blood that actually come through here make a sound that to our ears doesn't change in intensity. And it occurs all the way until the second heart sound when this aortic valve closes. And at that point in time, a millisecond or so later, the mitral valve will open again and start a new diastolic cycle. So as I've written here, we actually call this a holo or pansystolic murmur. In addition, it's also referred to as a flat murmur because the intensity does not change. And this murmur will actually radiate to the axilla. And so if you picture this valve kind of sitting in this general area somewhere, when blood flow goes back the other way, it's going to kind of be forced in the direction of this guy's armpit over here. Now again, just to mention the right-sided valve problem, tricuspid regurgitation, you have the same murmur, a holosystolic flat murmur, but in that case, you would hear it in the tricuspid area. And that murmur wouldn't radiate to the axilla because the valve is in a different position.